Okay, friends, it is a great pleasure and honor here to have you at this occasion. And on behalf of the Association of Iranica in Australasia, I have the great pleasure to welcome you all to this fifth lecture in the 2023 lecture series. Let me begin before anything else to acknowledge the indigenous people of all Australasia region, as well as the indigenous people of all nations around the globe. I also like to take this opportunity to pay a tribute and deep admiration to the women and the youth in Iran, who are in the process of gaining their human rights and also the establishment of peace in our beloved Iran. Now, just a little bit of background to these lectures. The Association of Iranica in Australasia was established in about 2004 in Sydney, and the source of inspiration was, of course, Encyclopedia Iranica through Professor Yar Shater and his wonderful, contribution to that mighty publication. Anyway, and we started off with some symposiums and forums and conferences, and we were very fortunate to have cooperation with the University of Sydney, University of New South Wales, and we had some wonderful contributors or advisors academically to participate in our activities. And we had these conferences on different themes. And during the COVID, even we had a kind of cooperative conference, which was actually a virtual conference with the Australian National University. The first year was about Persian music and literature, and the second year was Persian fiction. And what was so interesting that we had the participation from many Iranian PhD scholars and academics who participated, and even in terms of performing music, it was remarkable because we had an ensemble of these performers, all from Isfahan, Shiraz, and they had coordinated their ensemble to perform, and it was virtual, and they presented it so excellently. Anyway, so that was a summary of that. And then, of course, after the COVID, due to practicality of things and the whole logistic part of it, was we went virtual. So we had this series of virtual lectures since 2021. And they have been very successful. We had wonderful participants from various universities, University of California, Santa Barbara, Professor Janet Afari, and others. Afari. Anyway, we had some wonderful presenters. And now, of course, come to the today conference or talk. It is a great, really pleasure to introduce you to Professor SQuinn, who's our guest speaker. And her topic, as you have noticed, is about, let me read a bit about it. Yeah, she's speaking on writing across empires, an introduction to Persian historiography. Now, briefly, Professor SQuinn is a historian and she teaches at the University of California, Merced campus, Department of History and Critical Race and Ethnic Studies. And her research focuses on history of early modern Iran. And she's the author of several publications, including historical writing during the reign of Shah Abbas, and also the Iran. She has been the co-editor of Safavid Chronicle, which was published in 2000. And also she has written a book on Shah Abbas, the king who refashioned Iran. In 2015, it was published. And also she has been co-editor of History and Historiography of Post-Mongol Central Asia and Middle East Studies in honor of John Wood. That's the one that Professor Tucker referred to, the person. Anyway, and her most recent book, as you have seen it in the poster, is Persian Historiography Across Empire, the Ottoman, Safavids, and Mughals. And that's at Cambridge University in 2021. We also have equally great pleasure to have Professor Ernest Tucker, who will be the discussant in this presentation. And Professor Tucker teaches at the Department at the History Department at the U.S. Naval Academy since 1990s, and his expertise again is in the Middle Eastern studies and early modern Iran from University of Chicago. That's where his PhD was completed, and he spent time in the late 1980s and 2006, in writing and doing research in Istanbul as a Fulbright scholar in Ottoman period. And Dr. Tucker has also traveled extensively in the Middle East. And one of the interesting features of his travels, he had learned to speak the languages of Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, which is related to his specialization and expertise in that field. So this is a wonderful occasion, and I welcome you all to listen to Professor SQuinn. So it's all your show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And I would like to thank Mr. Roshan and the Association of Iranica in Australasia for inviting me to speak today, and also very grateful that my friend and colleague Ernie Tucker is here. We can be together. And although I wish we could be together in person, I'm so grateful for this technology that brings us together. So I will start sharing my screen so you don't have to just hear me talk. Let's see. We tested this and it works, so we know that. Let's see. Can you all see this okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So for several decades now, I have been interested in answering a very basic question, and that is, how was history written during the Safavid period of Iranian history? The Safavids, that dynasty that ruled Iran for approximately 200 years, from 1501 to 1722, are perhaps best known for their most famous king, Shah Abbas, and his capital city of Esfahan, or perhaps also known as the dynasty that established Imami Shi'ism as the official state religion. But in order to understand better Iran's Safavid past, we must gain a better understanding of one of the most important categories of sources produced during that period, and that's historical chronicles. So my questions have to do with how were these texts written, and what methods did Safavid era historians use to compose their histories, and how does that help us better understand the many transformations that took place during the course of the Safavid period? As I was starting to explore this question, I realized that during the Safavid period, Persian chronicles were also written under other dynasties, and in fact, outside of Iran, namely under the Ottoman Empire and the Mughal Empire. So I then proceeded to ask the related question, how was Persian history written across empires? So today I would like to share with you what I learned in the process of asking and answering these questions. So let's begin with the origins of Safavid historiography, because Safavid historiography, or historical writing, was not born in a vacuum. Rather, the earliest Safavid chroniclers drew upon and modified and expanded on models that were produced during the Timurid, the pre-Safavid Timurid, or even pre-Timurid periods. So we have to look at Timurid historiography to understand what came later. One of the main features of Timurid historiography is that Timurid historians engaged in a process of historical rewriting, whereby they took an earlier history and imitated that text, updating it to conform to whatever political agenda they were promoting. And we may refer to this process as imitative writing. Without knowing the model that the chronicler used, it is impossible to understand what their agenda actually was. Furthermore, many of the conventional elements that we see in Timurid historiography continued into the Safavid period. And I'd like to share some examples with you of what I've just said. Let me share an example of both imitative writing and the continuing of conventional elements from two texts. A late Timurid chronicle, the Rozat Safa by Mir Khan, who was, as I said, a late Timurid chronicler, and the Habib-ul-Siyad, one of the earliest Safavid era chronicles, written by Mir Khan's maternal grandson, Khandamir. Chronicles, I learned from this period, usually contain an elaborate introduction, dibache ya muqaddimeh, in which historians introduce themselves and explain how they came to compose this work. And in doing this, they showcase their finest writing. These introductions, however, are highly conventional, containing structural elements that later chroniclers imitated. So let me give you an example of this. In his introduction, the late Timurid chronicler Mir Khan tells us about how he came to write his history. And he explains how his learned companions encouraged him to write a history of the prophets, kings, and caliphs, but difficulties made him unable to reach his ultimate goal. I'm sure many of us who are struggling to write things know the feeling. Until suddenly events changed for the better and he could finish his composition. The deciding factor was the ascension of his new patron, Ali Shir Nava'i. So he writes in such manner, for a time this gloomy condition was prevailing when suddenly the breeze of divine favor stirred. And he goes on to explain how Ali Shir Nava'i made it possible for him to finish. Now, approximately 25 years later, in 1524, Khandamir follows the autobiographical information with some background on his patrons. He describes the death of his first patron, the problems he encountered after his death, and then a crucial turn of events took place. In this case, the advent of Shah Ismail and the installation of new officers at the court of Herat, where he was writing. In discussing this change of leadership, Khandamir uses the same wording that Mir Khan used to tell of his new patron, Ali Shir Navai, to describe meeting his patron, Habib Allah Karim ad-Din, allowing him to complete his history. Both historians consider these turn of events as positive changes in their lives. Khandamir wrote in a way that imitated his grandfather's chronicle, and I've highlighted the common words in each account in this slide. So Khandamir writes, several difficult and dark months passed in such manner, the unveiling of beauty of the desired one did not occur at all. Suddenly, the sun of divine favor arose from the horizon of infinite fortune. So you can see the connection between these two texts. So the Rosat Safa served as the historiographical bridge between the Timurids and the Safavids. Furthermore, describing this turning point of a patron who comes to the rescue of the chronicler, allowing him to complete his work, became one of several conventional elements in the preface of not just the Rosat Safa, not just the Habib Siad, but in nearly every Safavid chronicle from this point forward. Other conventional elements that we see in this tradition include the following. So these are the main sections of an introduction of chronicles in the Safavid period. A religious prologue, which contains praise of God, Muhammad, and family, an autobiographical section, and then information about the chronicler. So this is something about what imitative writing consists of. So let's now turn to the Safavids themselves and Safavid chroniclers and how they employed this method to narrate their own past. Safavid chroniclers continued this practice of imitative writing in their narratives of the Safavid past. And not only did they imitate each other, but they rewrote that Safavid past in order to make it conform to their own present. In the following, I'd like to give you an example of 3 texts that demonstrate how these sources are connected and the kind of process of rewriting that took place. Beginning with this text, Ibn Bazzaz's Safatu Safa. This is a 14th century hagiography of Sheikh Safi ad-Din. Sheikh Safi was the eponymous founder of the Safaviya Sufi order established in the northern Iranian city of Ardabil in the 14th century that eventually transformed itself into the Safavid dynasty in 1501 under Shah Ismail, who established Twelver Imami Shi'ism as the official state religion, imposing it on a population that at that time was majority Sunni. It is important to note here that according to the Safat Safa itself, the Safaviya order was Sunni, but not partisan. Okay, second source, Khandamir's Habib Siyar that we've already seen, composed during the reign of Shah Ismail, and a third text, the Zayla Habib Siyar, that was written in 1550 by Khandamir's son, Amir Mahmud, during the reign of Shah Tahmasp, Shah Ismail, who was Shah Ismail's son and successor. So I'd like to give you just one example that we see in all 3 of these texts, because each of these accounts narrates how Sheikh Zahid Gilani, who was Sheikh Safi's spiritual teacher, Murshed, told him to establish a center in Ardabil. And then he gave him a piece of advice. He said to Sheikh Safi, you must invite the people to the right religion and the straight path, and proclaim the invitation of Answer God's summoner in the four corners of this world, of the world. Okay, let's see how the next chronicler rewrote this passage and rewrote the advice. You must guide the people in the ways of the right religion and lead them on the path of the rightly guided community, and sound the call of Answer God's summoner to the four quarters of the seven climes. Now let's turn to the third example, the Zayla Habibosiyad. It behooves and befits you to exert a mighty effort to shepherd and guide those who believe in the seal of the prophets. May God bless him and his kindred and grant them all salvation in the way of the religion of Muhammad and in the path of the community of Ali. That's the significant addition here. Note how each chronicler, using imitative language, note how each chronicler, using imitative language, transforms the text that he imitates until by the time we get to the Zayla Habibosiyad, Sheikh Sahed is encouraging Sheikh Safi to guide believers in the way of the religion of Muhammad and in the path of the community of Ali. This reference to Ali, the first of the 12 Shi'i imams and the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, suggests that here Sheikh Safi was being encouraged to guide people upon the Shi'i path. This isn't the only time this happens. So let me give you another example. In the next example that I'm going to give you, we read about what happens after the death of Sheikh Zahed, who you will remember was Sheikh Safi's teacher and guide. When his teacher died, Sheikh Safi, we are told, engaged in the ceremonies of washing and burying his body. Okay, here is what the Habibosiyad tells us about that. Sheikh Safiuddin proceeded with the necessities of preparing and shrouding the body and performed the customs of mourning. Okay, now let's see how the text changes by the time we get to the Zayla Habibosiyad. Sheikh Safiuddin commanded that his pure body be washed according to the custom of the Prophet and in conformity with the practices of the 12 imams, and shrouded him. I think you can see what's happening here. These examples show that the most extensive historiographical Shi'i transformation of the Safavid past took place during the reign of the Safavid king Shah Tahmasp, when Amir Mahmud was writing. His recasting of the Safavid past made it seem that the Safavid founders were practicing Shi'is from the very start. This, I believe, was one of the lesser known ways that the Safavids engaged in the process of consolidating their Shi'i identity and converting Persia to Shi'ism. Amir Mahmud's textual manipulations were not merely a one-off. Rather, these changes stuck, if you will, because a chronicler from the time of Shah Abbas, Qazi Ahmad Qomi, imitated Amir Mahmud in his account of Safavid origins, thereby perpetuating that Shi'i version of the Safavid Sufi order into the period of Shah Abbas. And I won't read all of these again, but you can see by the time we get to the Shah Abbas era chronicle, the author of this text pretty much imitated everything that we see in the Zayla Habibosiyad. So the information that we, in the Zayl. So the information that we see in the Habibosiyad, where Sheikh Safi just gives kind of a generic funeral for his teacher has been entirely transformed. But that is the version that gets shot into the Safavid future, if you will. Amir Mahmud's recasting, okay, I think I already said that, sorry. Okay, I think I've made my point here with the Safavid Chronicles. Let me move on to writing across empires. This is the Persian part. If you'd like to look at this, I can show you afterwards. Let's now turn to Persian historiography across empires. Many Persian historiographical practices and conventional elements were not restricted to Iran or Safavid territory, but rather had circulated across the Persianate world into Mughal and Ottoman territory. So basically everything you see in the colors on this map. For example, and I'll give you an example of how this is not restricted to Safavid borders. For example, like Mir Khan and Khandamir, the Mughal chronicler Abul Fazl Mubarak, in the preface to his Akbar-nameh, which is a very extensive chronicle devoted to the Mughal king Akbar, described a similar turn of events, allowing him to write his history. However, it was not a new patron or ruler that saved him from his difficult situation, but rather his own intellect. So here we see this same pattern, the same model, sort of consistently going into the Mughal chronicle tradition. Suddenly a door of light was opened by the intellect, that glory of life, and my confused heart found the neck of hope fitted with the noose of resolution. The conventional elements of Persian historiography that we saw in Safavid prefaces also appear in this Mughal preface, reflecting the fluidity of the historiographical borders between and across empires. So whereas it may have been the case that the Ottomans and the Safavids were fighting each other, and same with the Mughals, culturally and in terms of historiography, these borders are, for all practical purposes, I would say non-existent. Okay, my next example of Persian historiography across empires consists of dream narratives. Many Ottoman, Safavid, Mughal, and other Persian chronicles, and at least one Timurid one, contain dream narratives. These dream accounts serve the purpose of legitimizing a particular ruler by making it appear that he was destined to rule. And this destiny was confirmed in the form of a dream that was then interpreted to mean that a particular individual would become king and have tremendous power over a large territory. By comparing these dream accounts across empires, we see that they share a number of common characteristics. So here's a chart. I'm not going to read all of this, but of the chronicler and who is having the dream in the chronicle. Okay. The dreamers, for example, are often dynastic founders or ancestors, such as the Safaviya Tariqa founder, Sheikh Safiuddin, the Timurid ancestor Kuchulai, and the founder of the Ottoman Empire, Osman Ghazi. The dreams themselves also share common features. Sheikh Safi dreams of a hat on his head and a sword tied to his waist. When he removes the hat, a sun shines from his head that brightens the entire world. Kuchulai dreams of 4, 7, and 8 stars filling the world with light. Osman Ghazi dreams of a tree sprouting from his navel, whose shadow encompasses the entire world. A Sufi sheikh dreams he was holding a lamp atop a hill that illuminated all the lands of the East. And the Mughal ruler Humayun dreams of a star rising higher and higher until its light embraced the greater portion of the world. The parallels continue into the ways the dreams are interpreted. Sheikh Zahid interpreted the sun in Sheikh Safi's dream as representing the light of sainthood and the sword, the mandate of sovereignty. So now power and authority are being interpreted in these dream narratives. Kachulay's father said that the stars represented the greatness of Chengiz Khan, a fourth generation descendant of Kabul, and Timur, who was an eighth generation descendant of Kachulay. Sheikh Edebali told Osman that his dream meant that sovereignty was granted to him and his descendants. Jamal ad-Din said the lamp meant Tughlaq Timur would convert to Islam, and a holy man told Humayun that everywhere in the world the light had shined upon would come under his control and dominion and flourish by the light of his justice. The dream narratives, therefore, were a device through which chroniclers across empires articulated their sovereign and dynasty's legitimate right to rule and made specific claims regarding the nature of dynastic and kingly authority in terms of religion and politics. These dreams were not historiographically static, conventional elements, as some were rewritten by later chroniclers. That the dream narratives all appear in a similar structural position at the beginning of the chronicles indicates that this had become a conventional element in not just Safavid, but Persianate historiography. Now I'd like to turn to the later legacy and Nader Shah. The methods and conventions of Persian historiography of the Safavid period continued into the post-Safavid era. This can most clearly be seen in later chronicles of Nader Shah. In 1736, 14 years after invading Iran, Nader was crowned king. Nader Shah was originally a chieftain of the Afshars, one of the Kizilbash tribes that originally put Shah Ismail into power. My friend and colleague Ernie Tucker has analyzed historical writing under the reign of Nader Shah, noting that these historians were concerned about Nader's relationship to the Safavid dynasty and his own political legitimacy. One chronicler, Mirza Muhammad Kazem Marvi, completed his Alam Araye Naderi in 1747. Marvi uses Safavid chronicles as imitative models for several portions of his history, indicating the longevity of historiographical conventions established by Safavid historians. Indeed, the very title that Marvi chose for his history, the Alam Araye Naderi, echoes the title of a famous Safavid chronicle, perhaps the most famous Safavid chronicle devoted to Shah Abbas, the Alam Araye Abbasi. Marvi devotes the first chapter of his chronicle to an explanation of Nader's birth. Here, Marvi includes what? A dream narrative in which Imam Ghuli Beg, Nader's father, dreams of a sun rising from his neck. The rays of that sun lit the whole world, east and west. Imam Ghuli Beg related the dream to his brother, who also coincidentally had the same dream, we are told. The brothers related their experience to a poor mullah who was skilled in astrology. The mullah interpreted the dream to mean that a child would soon appear from the line of Imam Ghuli Beg, who would conquer the whole world and would end up in the land of Khabushan. The mullah then stated that after a long time, another individual would appear who would rule in Iran for many years. According to Tucker, this is a reference to Shah Rukh, Nader's grandson. Shortly after this dream, Marvi tells us, Nader was born. This dream narrative is similar to accounts of Sheikh Safi's dream in terms of content and detail, but Marvi also uses imitative language in recounting the dream, using the Tarikh Alam Araye Abbasi as his model, as seen in the following parallel passages. And I'm not going to read all of this out loud here, but I think you can see that the language here is imitative and that Marvi is clearly familiar with, imitating, and using the Al-Amaraya Abbasi in his chronicle. Furthermore, this account appears in a similar structural position as the Safavid dream narratives at the beginning. Imam Ghuli Beg, Nader's father, is depicted much like Sheikh Safi in the Safavid accounts. Furthermore, the theme of a rising sun or star that lights the entire world, that is interpreted to mean the birth of a future king, is one that we find in Persian chronicles across empires, as I have noted above. My final example comes from the 19th century and the period of Nasir-ad-Din Shah, when a well-known chronicle entitled the Rozat Safai Nadiri by Reza Quli Khan Hedayat. Hedayat considered his work a continuation of Mir Khan's Rozat Safa, and that is that late Timurid chronicle. In his section on the Safavids, after providing the briefest sketch of Sheikh Safi's life, Hedayat states, Sheikh Safi, was situated upon the throne of guidance for more than 30 years, during which time, by revealing the secrets of recitation and remembrance, he guided more than 100,000 people on the true path of the 12 Imams. May the peace of God, the greatest kings, be upon them. So in this account of Sheikh Safi ad-Din, there are no miraculous dream narratives, and Hedayat asserts Sheikh Safi's Shi'i identity by stating that he guided 100,000 people on the Shi'i Imami path, adding numerical data that we do not see in the earlier sources. So I'm going to conclude now by just saying that today I have demonstrated just 3 simple points. First, Persian historiography is highly conventional in some sections. It is important to know what those conventions are when reading a text. Secondly, it is perhaps even more important to know your sources, because reading a text without that knowledge is like listening to only one half of a two-way conversation. We cannot know how the accounts change over time, which we did, unless we read them side by side. Third, it is important to read beyond the political boundaries of just one empire, because the chroniclers themselves were moving across empires and taking their histories with them. Reading across empires helps us better understand the, quote, Persianate world, that term coined by the famous scholar Marshall Hodgson. One of the features of that Persianate world was a common Persian historiographical tradition that freely crossed boundaries, as chroniclers read and responded to each other's work and the work of their predecessors, and articulated ideas about kingship and authority using similar language. And finally, the conventions and traditions that developed during the Safavid era did not disappear, but rather survived into the 18th and 19th century. And I will let my friend and colleague, Ernie Tucker, tell us more about that. Thank you so much for your patience. And I will stop the share here. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great.
Well, Shola, that was an absolutely brilliant discussion, and it's just an amazing, I think, linkage of all these, of both the chronologies of all these historiographical traditions, and also the geographical expanse that it provides. I think it's an incredibly rich field scholarly field to mine, and I commend you for having done such a wonderful job at making these connections. I guess can I start with the first question, or maybe gonna sneak in there? One thing that occurs to me here, this is very reminiscent of poetry well, it's not reminiscent, it's adjacent to, part of, connected to poetry in Persian. But the whole notion of competition in poetry, to me, is brought to mind, and the idea of chroniclers in a way saying, well, you had a good chronicle, but my chronicle can be even more beautiful. And maybe to talk a little bit about that. And also, in the case of chronicles, it's not just the imagery or the aesthetics of the chronicle that you are competing with. You can compete also with the vision of, for example, the religious vision that you mentioned that's brought in, or, the way government is thought of. So, I mean, I guess I would pose that to you to kind of investigate the idea of competition, both across time, but again, across empires. These empires had open borders, as you said, but they definitely saw the other empires as being, well, almost as good as us, but not quite, So, we want our chroniclers to show that. So maybe just expand on that point would be great.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Ernie. And I think the imitative poetry and the imitative historiography go hand in hand for sure. And our other friend and colleague, Paul Lazinski, I think has demonstrated this beautifully in his scholarship when we were all together in graduate school. I think you're absolutely right about competition, that it's almost like anteing up the stakes. Well, my king had a dream that, shed light upon this area. Your king may have done that, but my king had even a bigger dream and a fancier dream. And it's interpreted to mean that not only does he have sovereignty over, his territory, but he has sovereignty over the world. And then the next one said, so there's definitely competition going on in terms of the dreams, and also in terms of the legitimacy, as we've talked about, you've written about quite a bit, that they were competing in terms of trying to connect themselves to Timur and the Timurids. They are competing in terms of trying to present their king as the most legitimate. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you. Okay, well, with that, I'll turn the floor over to anyone who has a question. I'm not a person who's shy with words, so I can always ask more questions, but I would much rather hear someone else's question than hear another one from me. So any other thoughts or questions or observations or thoughts that bubble up as a result of what a fascinating presentation? Yes, go ahead. You need to unmute.
All right. My question, of course, I congratulate the presentation. It was wonderful. I just was looking at some of the Persian historiography. What would be the influence of Muqaddameh by Ibn Khaldun, which was an earlier period? Did that have any kind of impact or influence during the period that you talked about?
That's such a great question. And Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddamah was probably the most famous introduction in all of Islamic history. Interestingly, though, I don't think the Safavid chroniclers, they may have read Ibn Khaldun, they may have been familiar with him, but that's a really hard act to follow, because it's just the introduction itself is hundreds and hundreds of pages. So I don't think, I think they are looking to earlier Persian histories as opposed to that one, but that doesn't mean that they weren't familiar with it. I don't know, Ernie, what do you think?
Yeah, I would just throw in, I think it's, as I think about that, there's an interesting dimension there. I think a little bit of a different kind of competition. The Ottomans clearly used Ibn Khaldun and the Muqaddamah.
Really?
Yes, that was at the time of Sultan Suleiman. There's a very big use of it. However, I think that it was regarded in Iran, and I don't really have proof for this, but I have a feeling, looking at in particular some of these pieces of things, that it was seen as not really in the essential inheritance of Persian chronicles. And it sounds strange to say it that way, but it wasn't really Persian enough, you know. But curiously, things that are Turkish are brought in. You know, I mean, for example, Mir Alişir Navai, and all of his material, and a lot of chroniclers after him connect to the Turkish side. Turkish is sort of brought in as okay, but somehow Ibn Khaldun is seen as a foreign historiography, which is curious, I think, you know, but not for the Ottomans. I suppose for the Ottomans, you know, they saw themselves as connecting to the Persianate, to the Arab, to the Turkey, to all of it in a sense. So that's just my immediate reaction, but it's something I'm going to I'll research that. It's a very interesting idea.
You know, I think there's a way we can kind of get at this too, and I hate to turn my back here, but I need of my book. Can you help me find? Let me see if I can find an electronic version of this, because the way to get at this is that the Safavid chroniclers, some of them and some of the others as well, included a list at the beginning of their histories of
the sources.
Of the sources, exactly.
Yeah.
And some of them are Arabic texts, but I don't. I've listed those. But I don't remember Ibn Khaldun being there. Yeah. And there's no Persian, there's no Turkish sources that they used, Ernie. So that's right. Very interesting. But
that may be earlier and later too.
Maybe. And then the other thing that I think is interesting is just because they put something in their bibliography doesn't necessarily mean they actually used it either.
Or read it, right.
So, I mean, they may have said that they did, but they just list these. They just list these sources. Yeah,
it's kind of credentials in a way.
Exactly. So there goes the competition.
The Rekabets,
yeah. So and this goes back to like I said earlier, earlier works. And I'm just, if I just give me a second and I can, so in fact I'm not even familiar with Ibn Ishaq's Chronicle, Al-Isfahani's Hilyat al-Awliya, Ibn al-Athir's Al-Kamil. I mean, some of these are very, very well works. Ibn Khalikan, but I don't see Ibn Khaldun on that list. So that's kind of interesting.
And maybe he was just discovered by the Ottomans. There was I have to look that up and confirm that, but
that's really interesting. And then the list gets bigger. Actually, let me share this screen here, and you can see what this looks like. Do you all mind if I do that?
No, please go.
So here's a couple. Here's an Ottoman chronicle. Musliuddin Lodi's Mirat al-Advar and Mir Khan's Rozat al-Safat. These are both chronicles in Persian, and they both have these lists of the sources that they claim that they used. And you know, they're pretty much the same actually. I've tried to compare them. This guy, Mir Khan, divides them up between Arab and Persian texts. Lari does not. He combines them. So anyway, stop that.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I think Ibn Khaldun is more from an Arabic, source and background, and has been influential in the Persian literature, but not as you mentioned, to the extent that the others were.
And maybe somewhat later too, in that.
Yes. Right. Maybe later.
if I may, can I raise another question?
Please.
You know, it's very curious to see that, the whole business of Shiite Islam was established during the Safavid, Shah Ismail and so on, as a rivalry with the Ottoman, Sunni. That's one element. And then on the other hand, what was really this curiosity and interest in Persian language and history that, spread across the empires? I see this kind of, counter or, some kind of, contradiction between these two elements.
That's such an interesting question, and I am not sure if the dichotomy is as dichotomous as we might think, because I think Shiism developed in Iran in a very Iranian milieu, as it were, because really before the Safavids, most of the people in Iran were not Shi'is, and so the Safavids were I think the biggest and the longest lasting Shi'i state. I don't know, Ernie, maybe the Fatimids, but not really. I mean, the Safavids were really the most spectacular example of a Shi'i state. So it actually developed in Iran, and so the texts, yes, are in Arabic, but there's also texts in Persian, and it is all being articulated in this Persian or Persianate kind of a way. But then, as you said, at the same time, that doesn't stop the development of Persian poetry and all of these other Persian cultural. I mean, I can give you an example. The most spectacular Shahnameh, Mr. Haqiqi, perhaps in his study of art, knows this. The most spectacular Shahnameh that was ever produced was produced under the Safavids, the so-called Houghton Shahnameh, or the Shah Tahmasp Shahnameh. Yeah. Now, Shah Ismail and Shah Tahmasp are the kings that are most responsible, I think, for converting Iran to Shiism. So this is going on at the same time. So it's very interesting. I don't know, Ernie, do you have anything you want to add?
I guess, the thing that strikes me as I study Iranian culture more and more is the incredibly deep connections it has east and west, and in particular, the connections it has with India that go back long before Islam, but are accentuated so greatly in this period that we're talking about, that Indian gentlemen, writers, intellectuals, all of them learned some Persian. All of them. And many of them have large divans of poetry in Persian, even when they can't speak it. It's incredible, And in the Ottoman case, they turn it into Ottoman Turkish, but Ottoman Turkish, let's be frank, it's Persian with Turkish grammar. It's like it's the heart of the Persian soul and the calligraphy and the vocabulary. I once did a paper called Istanbul is a Persian City. And I presented it in Istanbul, and it was they were very polite, but they didn't like hearing that. But you can make a case that if you look at the way it's designed, it's so deeply tapped into the Persian spirit. And I'm not saying that to be a Persian nationalist or anything, but it's just that continuum, I think, that is connected through the Indian Ocean, on the sea, and through the Silk Road on the land, that is so vibrant in this chronicle tradition as well. The other thing I'll stop in a minute here is in British India, the rise of lithography suddenly made all these chronicles. Everyone in India had to have a copy of the Tariq, whatever, Alamaraya Abbasiya, Nadri, or, Jahangir Shah, Nadri, Jahangir Shah, Mughaliya, whatever, So this is it's interesting to think about how the modern technology makes the connections too, despite the fact that we've discussed a little bit that the modern technology ends the old tradition, but it also keeps it going too. So yeah, this Persianate again, we, Sheila and I are both graduates of the University of Chicago, so we have to honor Marshall Hodgson, who was our great founder of this Persianate idea. But despite honoring Marshall Hodgson, I actually kind of buy it still, and I think it's worth it. So I would just add that in to what Sheila, I think, very wisely said.
Could I add to that comment? Masood, we're running away with your question, but it's so interesting. I agree with you, Ernie, and I think that part of the problem has been that we have been studying the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals in like these separate compartments.
Separately, yeah.
Totally separately. It's such an artificial. These are artificial borders, and that has caused us to not look beyond these political boundaries. And it's caused problems for us. I mean, there were more chronicles written in Persian in India than in Iran. All right. If you look at the sheer number of histories written under the Mughals versus under the Safavids, there are more sources under the Mughals.
Yeah.
So, and then the other point I want to make about the Ottomans and the sort of spread of this Persianate culture, and this is something I'd always wanted to read more about, but I haven't. The Ottomans, and I can't remember when it began, but they actually had somebody at the Ottoman court whose job it was to recite the Shahnameh, the Shahnameh. Shahnameh, yeah. So this is like an official court position that this guy is sitting there reciting the Shahnameh. The Safavids didn't have that. Not to the best of my knowledge, but the Ottomans did. So there you have again the if you only look at the Safavids and not to the Persianate world, then you miss some of these connections.
Yeah.
Well, similarly with the Mughal, in India, they adopted Persian language, at during their ministry, and it was very prevalent, in that culture.
And that exact point was what I wanted to mention. Not just the Mughals, but the British East India Company that took over from the Mughals. For the first 40 years of the British in India, all the British bureaucrats had to learn Persian. And you're familiar with the Steingast Dictionary, which is the famous dictionary of Persian that was produced for India. It was an Indian project, right? An Austrian guy, of course, who did it, but it was done because of, all the legal documents of India were written in Persian, and all of them. And there's millions of dissertations to be written out there for people who know Persian and can look at the Indian sources. So, I would just echoing what you both said so eloquently.
Well, can I add one more echo to your echo?
Okay.
You're right, Ernie. Those British officials are reading the Persian sources, and I think the reason why so many of these Mughal chronicles from the classical period have been translated into English, if you look at the translators, if you open these books and you look at the translators, Major so-and-so or Colonel so-and-so, these are guys.
Yep.
That's
British Indian officials.
Yeah.
Exactly. Translating Mughal chronicles.
Yep.
In their copious free time, which must have been quite a bit. Yeah, it's and we're very grateful to them for having done that at least. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to carry on to and take time from both of you and the other audience, but one thing which came up in our previous presentation by Dr. Mozaffari, and he was concentrating on the concept of heritage, which are prevalent Persianate, heritage in Central Asia, especially with relationship between Iran and Turkey. And then the whole business of, taking the ownership or claiming the ownership of, for instance, Rumi, a Persian. The Turks, they say that, oh no, he's buried there. So the Afghan also claimed that, that was their honor, and but wonderful that they. So I mean, you have these socio-cultural elements which are related to more heritage, and they, of course, they become political as well.
They seem to become political and then nationalized, so that
Exactly,
whoever
yes.
the poet or figure at hand has to be from that particular nation state, whether case can be made for where he's buried, where he came from, the language he written in the case of Rumi. But a case could also be made that this is Persianate. This is Persianate.
Excellent.
And then you don't have to worry about who gets to claim Rumi. We all get to claim him. He belongs to all of us.
Yeah, the whole question of how the concept of nation states, certainly in the Middle East, now in Europe, is suddenly become a topic again, and I think it pertains to all this very directly. It's it's so interesting. I mean, thinking of India, for example, where you have 2 nation states in the past 70 years, created out of one that was a whole, so, or 3, I guess there's 3 nation states there, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, Mr. Hariri made a point in the chat. Would you like to share it, Miranja?
I'm sorry.
To mention what you said in the chat.
The chat. Oh, the
documentary.
I'm lost here. Sorry.
What you mentioned about your film.
Oh,
the film.
Oh, just if everybody's interested, they can go to their website, for the film's website of Kings and Painting. You get all the information about the film and where you can watch it, and how it's available to the educational or non-educational. But made me to think about the subject of another film on this time when I listen to this talk.
That would be great. That would be really great.
Actually, I was gonna send a message to both Mr. Tucker and Quinn if I can have your email address.
Sure.
And actually, I am going to, Masood, is it okay if I share my screen again one more time?
Yes. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Okay, here is the page. And this is the film. This is the film that Mr. Hariri has done. This looks fantastic.
Beautiful.
Yeah, this is really, really great. And it looks like there are DVDs, institutional options, and home use streaming, which is wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I really hope we can get this for my university. Thank you. I'm gonna. I'll put my email in the chat.
Yeah, I can do the same thing.
If no one, Masood, is it okay if I ask a question if no one else does?
Yes, please.
But I'll wait. Does anyone else have any questions? Because I don't want to sort of. If anyone else has any questions, please go ahead and ask away. Otherwise, I wanted to ask Ernie if you could say something about what happens to the Safavid legacy, historiographical legacy in the Nader Shah period, because I only know this Alamar Naderi, but then things go a little bit differently, and then again different in Qajar. So could you kind of, because it's like, it's a story that hasn't had an ending yet. So maybe you could...
That's true. Okay, yeah, sort of chapter 16 or whatever. Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you. It's so interesting because again, Iran, the 18th century, the beginning of this massive transformation, which moves towards the modern through the Qajars and the Pahlavis and into the present. But I think in historiography, it's very obvious too. You see it certainly Mr. Hagigi, in the paintings of the 18th century, where they just and again, when you get to the Qajar paintings, how different they have become by that point. And I think that in the chronicles, it's really interesting because, unlike the Safavids, who are, if they're competing with each other, they're competing for being more Shia than the previous one, right? But in the case of the Afsharid chroniclers, that is out the window, and the whole legitimacy of the Afsharids is now has to be based on connections to the Timurids, for example. They rediscovered Timur. And that whole connection and all of what Shola talked about with the dream narratives is recast in having dreams that Timur saw me and Timur showed me the treasure and Timur did this with Nader Shah. So that's very, very interesting. Then you get to the Qajar period, and they want to bring back all the sort of metaphors of the Safavid period, but just made explosively large. It's Shola and I talked about this a while back, and this notion of making the metaphors of Persian literature, which are fantastic, sort of just going out of control with them. And making these metaphors of gardens in particular. And we talked about, there's a very famous early Qajar chronicle called the Tarikh-e Muhammadi by Saru'i, which is, I always like to talk about it as the bustanification of chronicle traditions. It just goes into a total bustan, and it just, the trees just explode, And after that, the Qajars say, no. We gotta have science. We gotta have precision. We need, there's the German term Wissenschaft, right? So that you start to see chronicles in the middle of the 19th century, and Shola point at the last of this earlier chronicle tradition with Hedayat, but after him, and he begins to lead into this, but some of the chronicles of the time of Amir Kabir and all that good stuff, just the complete notion of positivism as the guide, which becomes, they use the guides of that's sort of the 19th century European and American framework too, and Iran adopts that wholeheartedly. Metaphors, they're fine for poetry, but we're doing chronicles, so we're doing documents. So I think that you see the 18th century, what I've studied in the 18th century really is the beginning. You can see the unfolding of that, or the collapsing of that edifice of historiography that's been built up, really, you could argue, since the Mongol period. I mean, you go to the Timurid period is definitely where it's coalesced, but I think it goes back as far as the Tariq Jahangir Shah Juvaini, right, into the 1300s and 1400s. So it's a really interesting time of change, and I commend you for discussing the Qajar period, because that is such an important time of evolution for Iran in so many ways. And I do think the chronicle tradition it captures that as well. So I think that's sort of what I would add, Shola, to what your wonderful presentation. That was kind of the final chapter in a way of that particular thing. So.
Yeah, I love the bustanification. I'm just glad I don't have to read those texts, because the Safavid ones are hard enough. But I thought it was really interesting the way Hedayat told that story. I mean, in just a couple of sentences, he just said he was there for 30 years. A couple sentences earlier, he gives a date. He says 30 years, guided more than 100,000 people. So like, you've got this. It's almost like, let me give you this numerical data, the dream.
Precision.
The numbers are always round, perfect numbers, the kind of rewriting and the assumption that Sheikh Safi was a Shi'i is there, but it's almost like it's ended, there's no more need longer to rewrite anything. It's all accepted. This happened. These are how many people he guided. But then the problem is, if that's and this is what I keep going back to, you can't just read one text, because they are constantly rewriting the past. So if you only read one thing, it's like you're getting a snapshot of just one period of time, and you don't know what that is like in comparison with the earlier period until you see what was written earlier. So this reading things side by side, I think, is essential to understanding what the chroniclers are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to go in, which is what you did too, by comparing, the Afsharid tradition with the early Qajar and then the later Qajar tradition.
And the Zand even too, in there. So
yeah, we haven't talked about the Zands.
right. But we could. I mean, yeah.
So other participants, any questions, please raise them.
You can see we're not shy. So
No, we're not shy at all. Maybe we talked so much, Ernie, no one else wants to get a word in. That's why.
Yeah, just one more thing, that going to the fundamental question of the origin of Shiite Islam, I came across with a source, I don't know whether you two have come across with this, that actually the Safavid, of course, they disseminated, and basically established Shiite Islam, in Iran. But the origin of it, I heard it was from a Tatar, tribe that the Safavid borrowed and then promoted it and, expanded in rivalry to Sunni Ottoman. So I don't know whether there is a validity in that or not.
It's very interesting. I hadn't heard that one myself, actually, but I guess what I can say is that the origins of Iran's sort of Shi'i identity and how that all happened is still a matter of research and is still being discussed. And why Shah Ismail decided on Shi'ism when he came to power, I think is still an open question. I mean, it's not easy to convert an entire country, but it was a successful project. But some have suggested that when he was in Lahijan, before he crowned himself king, that he was influenced by people there, that even though Iran wasn't already Shi'i, there were pockets of Shi'is, and Shi'ism was there. It just wasn't in the state that we know it today, because as the Ottomans, and the same with Sunnism, I would say. I mean, I don't know if Ernie would agree with me, but as the Ottomans are becoming more Sunni, the Safavids are becoming more Shi'i, and they're doing this simultaneously, and so that's where the competition comes in as well. So if you go back to the earlier period, things are not that things. I guess we're in that period of what our teacher called confessional ambiguity, that you could be very loyal and devoted to the family of Ali and even to the imams, but still belong to a Sunni mazhab, and things were not as clear cut as they gradually came to be over the course of the Safavids.
Yeah, I guess my sense is there's always so much more connectivity between Sunni and Shi'i worlds than people give credit for there being. I mean, there's so many parts of Shi'i tradition that connect to Sunnis and vice versa, both historically and even currently, I mean, think about the figure of Hussein, for example. Hussein, of course, is one of the greatest paradigm of Shi'ism in many ways. But Hussein is a figure venerated not just by Shia, but by lots of different groups around the Muslim world, across the Muslim world. I can think of, for example, Sunni Kurds in Turkey, I know, have a tremendous affiliation with Hussein. I mean, everyone has their different versions of all these things religiously, but I think the connections, it's always so easy to find the divisions, but the connections on a day-to-day basis maybe are even more important. I don't know. I mean, certainly in strategic moments, the divisions become important, right? That's true over the last 1,000 years, that there have been moments of tremendous division and war and disconnection. But that being said, I think that the connectivity seems, if you go to these places, it feels more deeper to me, certainly in that sense. And, I mean, like in Uzbekistan, I can say, it's a place where there's sort of tremendous connectivity of all these different. Well, now, of course, with it opened up now with the Silk Road again, I mean, it's sort of everyone is connecting in Uzbekistan. It's like a transit point, but I think also culturally, I feel like that's always been true, even when there have been wars. I mean, there obviously been lots of wars, but that being said, you think about all the Iranians with connections, say in the Caucasus, right? You think about the Turks with connections in Iran. You think about, I don't know. There's just a lot of connectivity, and maybe I'm just too much into the friendly connectivity. I would like to promote that, but I've felt it, I guess, also. So, yeah.
I think that's where I think this idea of the Persianate world. I don't know how our Turkish friends feel about that, because
they get a little bit silly about it because of the the word. But if you could find a good Turkish word for the same thing, that'd be happy. Turco-Persianate world or something, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
But I think that's where, again, this single word coined by Marshall Hodgson, back in the 1960s, is just kind of exploding now, because you have books talking about the Persianate world. You have a journal of Persianate studies. You have a society for the study of Persianate studies, and they have conferences. It sort of allows you to look beyond sort of sectarian divisions and political divisions and talk about some of the things that we've been talking about here, about the chronicle tradition, for instance. These are Persian chronicles were written under the Sunni Ottomans, following the same patterns, the same models, the same traditions as Persian chronicles that are being written under Safavids, and professing, of course, Shiism and pushing whatever their religious agendas are, but the language is the same and the models and conventions are the same. So I think maybe that's kind of what you're also getting at, Ernie, with the with the connectivity, I guess.
Yeah, and it goes just hit me. The music is so connected. I mean, it's different. It's distinct. Arabic music, Turkish music, Persian music is distinct, but there's a tremendous. It's of a piece together, I think. I mean, I was just thinking of this one song I know, which is a Turkish and Arabic song, but I'm sure there's an Iranian version too. These different melodies. I mean, it's just that those things just connect.
I see in our audience also, Reza is a very skilled calligrapher. Reza is
beautiful.
Hello, everyone. Thank you
he's an expert in different style of calligraphy, so he can enlighten us on.
My teacher, I would love to learn.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Masoud.
Is that calligraphy pieces behind you?
You're breaking.
Your sound is breaking up, Shola, a little bit.
Oh, is that one of your calligraphy pieces behind you?
Yes, this is one of.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Thank you so much. This is Persian traditional calligraphy.
Oh, it's just beautiful.
Do you have a website?
Yes, I have.
Could you share with us so we can
Yes, of course, it's my pleasure. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Were you in, how did you learn how to do that?
I learned in Iran. I started in Iran when I was teenager, 20 or 30 years ago.
Did your family have a tradition of calligraphy, or
no?
no? You just had an ustaz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And currently, I'm studying on calligraphy in Persian Visual Culture in Western Sydney University.
Oh, lovely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Let's
really wonderful.
put my website. Thank you, Masood.
It is so nice to meet you, and thank you for showing us your calligraphy behind you. And please,
It's my pleasure.
here's a question. Here's a question in the chat.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I would say it's so nice to meet you, Bushra. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. I think you're right. Yes. I mean, Persian probably has overshadowed other languages, but other languages are still spoken. And I don't know if Kurds voluntarily and happily have embraced Persian as opposed to Kurdish. I'm so disconnected with contemporary Iran. I can't say, but I think at least in the answer to the first part of your question is yes. I don't know,
Yeah.
Ernie.
I would agree with that. I think that's true. I think that's the side of the Persianate concept, that it is so powerful that it can actually have an effect of moving other traditions a little bit to the side, maybe to some degree. Of course, the other thing about Persian language is that it has an endless capacity to adopt from other languages too. So there's that. But I think you're right that the literary traditions of other languages, perhaps those spoken in Iran today. I mean, I think about, languages. I mean, you can talk about Kurdish and Turkish, but there are many other sub-dialects and languages too. But I would agree with that. It's a complicated issue. Yeah.
I don't know if we've answered your question, Bushra, enough, or feel free to write in the chat if you like.
It's a great topic. Great question. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer. Yes. Yeah, I was reading like the historiography in 19th century, like in Tabriz, like Nader Mirza or other written books that in 19th century was written in Tabriz, and all were in Persian. And it was like surprising not to sing anything in Turkish, although like the spoken language in Tabriz was like other Turkish. So yeah, I was like wondering if there are any researchers that discuss like how I don't know how people felt about it, like how it was like understood in Tabriz at that time.
Well, it's interesting that, in a place like Tabriz, they connected so much with the Caucasus at that time. And there's a very famous, speaking of art, the famous newspaper called Molla Nasruddin, which is one of the great satire magazines of the early 20th century. It was produced, I think, I'm not sure where it was published, but it went to all the different places. And I suppose the way they got around the language problem was just to have pictures, and they would have Persian and Turkish, but it was sort of a combination of Persian and Turkish written in that. But it was a brilliant, it was something that everyone read in the whole area and talked about. So that maybe that was one way that problem was addressed in some ways. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was fascinating that it was published in Baku, in Azerbaijan, and it had a wider circulation in Iran, than, its origin and so on. We had an excellent presentation on that, Mullah Nasruddin, by Professor Afari. She's written a book on that, actually. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Masood, would it be okay if I share my screen again?
Yes, 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 please.
Because you all have to see these. Oh my goodness, hold on. Let me try. Uh-oh. Ah, here. These are the calligraphies of Mr. Taghipour.
Wow. Wow.
These
Wow.
are
Wow. These are incredible.
wow.
Yeah, Reza had several exhibitions, you know, in Sydney and other cities. And also he was very actively participated in, I think, the film festival in Iran, that he did
Wow.
Wow.
the theme, you know, the calligraphy or design of the logo and so on.
Wow. This is all very current, you know.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's very
They're
much
beautiful.
speaks to the moment. It's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. My screen is not loading fast enough, but these are just
It's coming.
these are have you given a talk on your have Mr. Taghipour and Mr. Haqiqi given talks on their films and paintings, Masood?
Well, Mr. Haqiqi has been very generous. He gave the right of a screening through our association, which was
Nuts.
shared, you know, publicly on a whole long weekend. And Reza has been mainly, you know, active in designing the, you know, the
Wow.
conferences, logos, and other things. Well, Reza John, you can tell us, you know, about your more recent activities.
We are going to do first Persian music festival in Sydney. And yeah, this is the first Persian music festival in Sydney and Australia. And I designed all poster and logo for, and I'm going to do live calligraphy performance combined with Persian traditional music.
Will it be streamed? Will it be streamed maybe, or?
Do we have to fly to Sydney to see this?
Will you make video? Will you make video?
Yes, yes. We gonna record it, but
okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we should just come.
Oh, it would be our pleasure.
Yeah, actually, that Reza, when I mentioned about that conference on music and Persian poetry, Reza had a fantastic video presentation of Shahnameh Khani, and that was with full tradition and costumes, everything. Fantastic.
Wow.
Anyway, friends, I think
Mr. Taghipour, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Are you related to late Iraj Taghipour?
No, not unfortunately.
Because you say you were in the cinema in Iran.
I
Involved.
worked 2 times for the Fajr Film Festival.
Yeah, well, because okay.
2 years ago, I designed whole poster design or any design for book for anything for Fajr Persian Film Festival. And also I did 12 years ago. I designed and I did calligraphy and book design for Fajr Film Festival. And yeah, just some Persian Film Festival.
I have a question. I was holding back, but I didn't want to get political. It's not a political question, but you went all the way to Qajar, but you never touched Pahlavis and the current regime on the historiography. What do you have? Do you have anything? Is it just stopped by the end of the Qajar, or just carried on to the contemporary regimes, and including Pahlavis and the Islamic Republic? I don't want to get political. I just, I was interested.
you're not getting political, you're getting contemporary. And
Yeah.
I have I have my hands full with the Safavid period, but I can say that I think even if I'm not mistaken, Ernie, our friend Cameron Amin has done something on Pahlavi historiography for Islamic Republic. He actually wrote a paper for that Woods Festschrift where he looked at how the Safavids were taught in current textbooks.
Curriculum, yeah.
Curriculum, yeah. So how is the Safavid period being taught in Iran today? So is it more imitative writing? But I just have not out of not wanting to be political, but because these Persians wrote so much in the Safavid period, I feel like I'm facing huge mountains of texts that I can't, and the kind of work that is necessary to understand what's happening is so sort of intricate, and you have to look at every single word. So I haven't looked at that.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a very worthwhile thing to look at. I think I would, our colleague, as Shola mentioned, Dr. Cameron Amin, has done a lot of work on this, on historiographical images. And obviously it's incredibly important in the Reza Shah period, especially. Especially.
Islamic Republic, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, but that could be a whole nother talk. You should invite different people we can suggest, so it's another, it's great. Yeah.
And
great
where
question.
is Mehran Amin based? Sorry.
He's in Michigan, University of Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting because you got all these visual and audio media.
Totally. Yep.
And they still, they write it, from the, still the historiography is, it's
Right,
not
there's-
like this.
Right.
Oh, actually, I do have one tiny example, which I put in my dissertation, but I don't think I left it in my dissertation. And that is that if you look at one of the autobiographies of the last king, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, he actually has a dream narrative in there. And he talks about how the Shi'i imam came to him and guided him.
Yep.
And I made the point in that saying that, this is not just coming out of nowhere. There is a tradition of having these kinds of prophetic dreams, only it's being cast in the form of an autobiography that was produced. I think he wrote that in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
Just an interesting, yeah.
This one final thing.
My own film, I stopped in at the end of the Qajar, just touch a little bit of Pahlavi. I didn't want to get into the
Right. The whole thing.
contemporary
Yeah. There's a lot there.
yeah.
Anyway, friends, it's such a wonderful session, as you can see, we can go on, and talk about many aspects. And thank you sincerely, both of you, Shola John and also Annie, for sharing these wonderful, ideas and enlightening, information for all of us.
It's been so much fun. It's been so much fun.
Yeah,
it's a great pleasure.
Yeah.
Could I just say one thing in response to what Mr. Hadi just said?
Yes.
And I was inspired by the calligraphy of Mr. Tahipur, that it seems that at least in
very powerful.
In the last year since the Zan Zendegi Azadi movement, there's been an explosion of art and an explosion of creativity that, because we're all still in it in a way, maybe it's too soon to sort of study it, but it is both from inside and outside of Iran. Just see that before our very eyes, alongside all of the suffering and everything, and the oppression and all the other things that we saw. Somebody, one of you two or both of you should Tell us about that.
The deeply creative spirit is renewing in that sense.
Yeah,
You
in,
know.
in all genre, He's
All
done,
Yes.
genres.
everything.
Yeah,
Exactly.
across
Music,
right,
film,
Yes, yes.
everything.
Graphics, and everything.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yes.
Don't find it, Irani.
Right.
Yeah, there was one more point, you know, that Bushra raised, and it's quite valid, really, because I relate to the previous experience. We had that conference on music in Iran, and we had expert presentation by Mr. Darvishi. And he elaborated that not only, you know, these basically the identity of these minority groups in Iran, you know, Kurds, Turks, and Arabic, and all these, they all have their own identity merged in this overall Persian or Persianate culture. And it's quite valid, you know, that even the music, you can't say that, oh, this is Persian Sunnati music, because they have exactly wonderful, you know, organization of Kurdish music, which has its own identity. So in other words, there is this multiplicity of cultures within Iranian.
Within the unity. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.